I've been thinking about it, and I think it's the right thing to do.
You're breaking up with me? I thought you were proposing.
Proposing? Elle, if I'm gonna be a senator, well, I need to marry a Jackie, not a Marilyn.
So you're breaking up with me because I'm too blonde?
I do love you. I just can't marry you. Bad salad.
Imagine this. You dress up for dinner like it's the final scene of a romantic movie. Your outfit is perfect. Your hair is perfect. Your future, apparently, is also perfect. Because tonight, obviously, he's going to propose. In your mind, the entire sequence has already played out. The restaurant lighting, the awkward speech, the ring appearing from nowhere like a magician's trick. You even rehearsed the surprised face, but instead of a ring, you get a breakup speech?
We should break up.
Congratulations, you've just experienced what psychologists call a catastrophic prediction error. In Legally Blonde, Elle Woods walks into dinner glowing with expectation. She's convinced Warner is about to propose. Instead, he calmly explains that she's not the kind of woman he needs. Apparently, she's a Marilyn, and he needs a Jackie, which is a very elegant way of saying, I've already categorized you in my head, and unfortunately, you don't fit the job description. And just like that, the future Elle had been mentally living inside collapses. Not next month, not next year, right there between appetizers and dessert. This is why Heartbreak feels so disorienting, because it's not just emotional, it's neurological chaos. According to neuroscientist Carl Friston, the brain operates as a prediction machine. Your mind is constantly building models of the future, who you'll be with, where your life is going, what tomorrow is supposed to look like. When a relationship feels stable, your brain quietly starts writing the next chapters, vacations, anniversaries, maybe even a wedding. Then one sentence detonates the entire narrative. Suddenly your brain is forced to confront something it hates more than anything: uncertainty. But the damage doesn't stop there. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby, explains that romantic partners gradually become what psychologists call a secure base. Someone your nervous system uses to regulate safety. They become the person your brain unconsciously categorizes as home. So when the relationship ends, your mind doesn't just lose a partner, it loses stability, which explains the insomnia, the obsessive thoughts, the urge to replay every conversation like a detective investigating a crime that already happened. Your brain isn't being dramatic, it's trying to rebuild a map of reality. And then there's the part that feels almost unfair. Social rejection activates the same neural circuitry as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex doesn't care whether you broke a bone or got your heart broken. Pain is pain, which means Elle crying in her pink tracksuit surrounded by chocolate and romantic movies. That's not weakness, that's neuroscience doing exactly what it's designed to do. But Heartbreak has another layer, a philosophical one. Jean-Paul Sartre would call Warner's explanation a classic act of bad faith. Instead of seeing Elle as a complex human being, he reduces her to a label. Marilyn, a type, a category, a stereotype, and Heartbreak often contains this moment when someone defines you by what you are not. Not serious enough. Not ambitious enough. Not mature enough. Philosophically, the task isn't to prove them wrong. The task is to refuse the definition entirely. Then there's Heraclitus, the philosopher who famously said, "You cannot step into the same river twice. Everything changes. Everything flows." The future Elle was grieving that night, it never truly existed. It was a projection. A beautiful, hopeful, perfectly imagined projection. Heartbreak simply exposes what was always true, that the future was never guaranteed. Which brings us back to Elle's quiet line at dinner. "I thought you were going to propose."
I thought you were proposing.
And in that single sentence lies the entire anatomy of heartbreak. The gap between expectation and reality. That gap is where the pain lives. And if you're standing inside that gap right now, confused, humiliated, wondering how you misread everything so badly, then congratulations, you're not broken. You're simply experiencing one of the most neurologically and philosophically disorienting events a human being can experience. Which means the first step isn't fixing it, it's acknowledging it. Because before the comeback, before the transformation, before the glow-up montage, there's always a moment where you're just like Elle Woods, sitting in a pink tracksuit, realizing the future you imagined has disappeared. And oddly enough, that's exactly where the real story begins. So let's embark on this mental journey of self-discovery filled with silly surprises. After the breakup scene comes the universal second act of Heartbreak. Phase 1, emotional collapse. You cry, you replay the conversation 73 times, you analyze every text message like it's a classified government document. And eventually, you reach the philosophical conclusion shared by all heartbroken people, I will never love again. Naturally, this belief lasts about 3 days, because something interesting happens after the initial shock. Pain starts looking for somewhere to go. In Legally Blonde, we see this turning point perfectly. After Warner dumps her, Elle spends several days in full heartbreak mode. Movies, chocolates, pink sweatpants, standard scientific recovery protocol. But then something shifts. Instead of disappearing into permanent misery, Elle announces something completely unhinged. I'm going to Harvard Law School.
This is the type of girl that Warner wants to marry. This is what I need to become to be serious.
What? Practically deformed?
No. A law student.
Now, to be clear, this decision is not coming from a place of spiritual enlightenment. Her reasoning is extremely simple. Warner went to Harvard. Therefore, she will also go to Harvard. Pure motive? Absolutely not. Effective? Surprisingly, yes. And this is where Elle accidentally demonstrates one of the most powerful psychological principles in behavioral science. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a treatment for depression called behavioral activation. The idea is brutally simple. You don't wait until you feel like doing something productive, because if you wait for that feeling, you will be waiting forever. Instead, you act first, and the motivation shows up later. Elle does not wake up one morning thinking, ah yes, I suddenly feel emotionally ready to pursue a legal career. No, she's still heartbroken, still angry, still probably imagining Warner's face every time she opens a textbook. But she studies anyway, and that action begins to rewire her sense of control. Because heartbreak does something dangerous to the human mind. It creates rumination. Rumination is what happens when your brain decides the best solution to emotional pain is to replay the past repeatedly. You analyze conversations. You reinterpret memories. You search for hidden meanings in sentences that were probably just sentences. But rumination has a flaw. It moves backward. Behavioral activation moves forward. And Elle, perhaps accidentally, chooses forward. Now here's another layer. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan propose something called self-determination theory. According to them, human motivation depends on 3 core needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Heartbreak tends to destroy the first 2. You feel rejected, you feel powerless, you start questioning your value, but look at what happens during Elle's Harvard preparation montage. She studies relentlessly, she masters the LSAT, she builds competence. And competence has a strange side effect. It restores self-respect. Not because someone else gave it to you, but because you earned it. Philosophy actually anticipated this long before psychology caught up. Jean-Paul Sartre famously argued, existence precedes essence, which means you are not defined by labels other people give you. You are defined by the actions you choose next. Warner labeled Elle as a Marilyn, a stereotype, a category. But instead of arguing with him, Elle does something much more powerful. She changes the story through action. Not speeches, not revenge, just movement. Aristotle would call this praxis. Praxis means something very simple. The difference between knowing what is good and doing it. Many people understand what would improve their lives. They should study more, learn a skill, start a project. But heartbreak often traps people in analysis instead of action. Elle skips the analysis stage entirely. Her motive may be questionable, but her action is undeniable. And strangely enough, that's enough. Which leads to the most important takeaway from this chapter. Your Harvard does not need to be Harvard. It might be learning a skill, starting a business, getting in the best shape of your life, writing something, building something, or even traveling somewhere you've always postponed. The motive doesn't have to be noble. It can be heartbreak, it can be anger, it can even be a tiny bit of spite. The universe, interestingly enough, does not require pure intentions to reward productive behavior. Action still counts. Growth still happens. And that leads to the question this chapter quietly leaves you with. If heartbreak releases all this emotional energy, if pain is looking for somewhere to go, then the real question isn't, why did this happen to me? The real question is, where will you send that energy next? In other words, what is your Harvard? If heartbreak has a second stage after emotional devastation, it's identity confusion. Because when a relationship ends, something strange happens. You don't just lose a person, you lose a role. Suddenly, you're no longer someone's partner, someone's future spouse, someone's plan, and your brain begins asking a deeply uncomfortable question: who exactly am I now? This moment arrives for Elle the second she steps onto Harvard's campus. Immediately, she becomes the outsider. The professors underestimate her. The students dismiss her. At one point, someone literally says she doesn't even go here, which is an impressive statement considering she very clearly does. But here's the interesting part. Harvard, the place Elle initially entered just to chase Warner, slowly becomes something else entirely, a proving ground. In the classroom, she starts winning arguments. In the courtroom, she notices details others miss. In Paulette's salon, she solves problems nobody else can. And gradually, something unexpected happens. Elle discovers she's actually very good at this. Not good for a fashion major, not good for someone like her, just good. Psychology has a fascinating explanation for why heartbreak can trigger this kind of transformation. It's called self-expansion theory, developed by psychologist Arthur and Elaine Aron. The theory suggests that in close relationships, we begin to merge parts of our identity with our partners. Their goals become our goals, their world becomes our world. Their validation becomes part of our self-concept. Over time, the line between you and the relationship gets blurry. In Elle's case, her identity had quietly become Warner's girlfriend. Not maliciously, not intentionally, just gradually. But when Warner removes himself from the equation, that identity collapses, which creates a terrifying but strangely liberating question. What remains when that role disappears? Harvard becomes the place where Elle finds the answer. And the answer, interestingly enough, has nothing to do with Warner, because what begins rebuilding her confidence isn't romance, it's competence. She earns respect by winning legal arguments. She gains recognition by mastering difficult material. She solves problems nobody else can solve. This is what psychologists call competence-based identity, and it's significantly more stable than validation that comes from relationships, because relationships can end, but skills stay with you. Once you know what you're capable of, that knowledge becomes very difficult to take away. There's also something else happening beneath the surface of Elle's story, something psychologists call post-traumatic growth. Researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun discovered that adversity doesn't always just damage people. Sometimes it develops them. Not immediately, not comfortably, but eventually. People often report increased personal strength, deeper meaning, and new possibilities after major life disruptions. In other words, they don't simply recover to who they were before, they grow into someone different. Ella's entire Harvard journey is a perfect example. The breakup didn't just hurt her, it rerouted her. Philosophy has been talking about this process for centuries. Nietzsche famously wrote, "Become who you are," which sounds confusing until you realize what he meant. Nietzsche didn't believe identity was something you discover, he believed it was something you forge. Through effort, through struggle, through pressure, and heartbreak unfortunately provides all three. Warner didn't intend to push Elle into greatness, but by rejecting her, he unknowingly created the conditions for it. The breakup was the spark. Harvard became the forge. Aristotle might describe what happens next as the pursuit of eudaimonia, true flourishing. But Aristotle had a very specific definition of flourishing. It doesn't come from comfort, it comes from exercising your highest abilities. Elle begins flourishing the moment she stops performing the role of perfect girlfriend and starts exercising her actual excellence. The courtroom, the arguments, the strategy. These were abilities that always existed. They simply needed pressure to emerge. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating philosophical puzzles ever proposed, the ship of Theseus. The thought experiment goes like this. If you replace every plank of a ship over time, is it still the same ship? Now think about Elle. Is the woman graduating from Harvard the same woman who walked into that restaurant expecting a proposal? Technically, yes. But also, not really. She has different abilities, different confidence, different identity, and that's exactly the point. Heartbreak isn't asking you to return to who you were before the relationship. That person existed in a completely different story. Heartbreak is clearing the ground for someone new, which leads to a powerful question worth asking yourself. Inside most relationships, people quietly set parts of themselves aside. Maybe a hobby, maybe a goal, maybe a curiosity, maybe even a personality trait, things that felt inconvenient or unnecessary, or incompatible with the relationship. But those parts didn't disappear, they just went quiet. So here's a question worth writing down. What did you quietly stop doing, wanting, or being inside that relationship? Because the answers to that question are not reminders of what you lost. They're clues about what you're now free to reclaim. Elle didn't become someone entirely new at Harvard. She simply rediscovered parts of herself that had been overshadowed. Her intelligence, her determination, her creativity. The pink sequins were always there. Heartbreak just forced her into a place where she finally had to use them. And that's the strange gift hidden inside painful endings. Sometimes the relationship you thought defined your life was actually limiting it, and losing it is the event that finally reveals who you were capable of becoming all along. At some point in every heartbreak story, there's a confrontation. Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's imaginary. But eventually you face the person who hurt you, or at least the version of them living inside your head. And the question becomes, what do you do with that pain? Do you carry it forever? Do you seek revenge? Do you wait for an apology that may never arrive? Or do you release it? This moment arrives for Elle when Warner reappears at Harvard. And not alone, he's now engaged to Vivian, which is an impressive plot twist considering he once told Elle she simply wasn't serious enough for his future. Apparently, seriousness improves dramatically when someone else is wearing it. But here's the interesting thing. Earlier in the story, this would have devastated Elle. She would have tried harder, proved herself more, competed for his approval. Instead, something different happens. She stops competing entirely. And by the time Elle wins the case, standing in that courtroom fully confident in who she has become, Warner suddenly decides something remarkable. He wants her back. Of course he does. Nothing increases someone's perceived value like watching them succeed without you. But when Warner offers himself again, Elle simply declines, calmly, politely, without bitterness, without drama.
I just wanted to say that you were so brilliant in there.
I've waited so long to hear you say that. But if I'm going to be a partner in a law firm by the time I'm 30, I need a boyfriend who's not such a complete bonehead.
And that quiet refusal becomes one of the most powerful moments in the entire story. Because she isn't rejecting him out of anger, she's rejecting him because she no longer needs anything from him. And that, surprisingly, is what forgiveness actually looks like. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in emotional healing. Most people assume it means one of three things: reconciliation, excusing what happened, or pretending the pain never existed. But psychologically speaking, none of those things are required. Psychologist Everett Worthington developed a framework called the Reach model of forgiveness. It breaks the process into 5 stages. Recall the hurt, empathize with the offender, offer forgiveness as an altruistic gift, commit to the decision, and hold on to that commitment over time. Notice something important here. Forgiveness is not a single moment, it's a process. Elle doesn't forgive Warner during the breakup scene. She processes him across the entire film, through the humiliation, through the ambition, through the discovery of who she is. By the time Warner returns, she's already done the internal work, which means his apology or lack of one no longer matters. And that brings us to another uncomfortable truth about heartbreak. Closure is largely a myth. Many people believe healing requires one final conversation, a heartfelt apology, a dramatic explanation, some grand moment where everything suddenly makes sense. But psychological research suggests something different. Closure is mostly a narrative we create for ourselves. Healing rarely arrives because someone else provides the perfect ending. It arrives because you stop waiting for them to. Elle never receives a deeply emotional apology from Warner. He doesn't suddenly realize how profoundly wrong he was. There's no cinematic redemption speech. And yet, she heals anyway, because the final conversation happens inside her own mind, not across a dinner table. There's another psychological element quietly working beneath this transformation, something called self-compassion. Researcher Kristen Neff discovered that people who treat themselves with kindness during painful experiences recover significantly faster from emotional distress. But here's the problem. Heartbreak often triggers the opposite reaction. Instead of compassion, people turn inward with criticism. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? How did I miss the signs? Bitterness toward the other person often hides a deeper layer of self-blame. Elle could have spent her entire Harvard journey resenting Warner. Instead, she redirected her energy toward growth, toward competence, toward becoming someone she respected. And in doing so, she replaced resentment with something far more powerful: self-respect. Philosophy has long recognized the power hidden inside forgiveness. Hannah Arendt argued that forgiveness is one of the most radical acts humans can perform. Because without forgiveness, every action in the past permanently binds us to the person who caused it. Resentment becomes a chain. Every memory pulls you back toward the same emotional injury. Forgiveness, according to Arendt, breaks that chain, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by refusing to let it control the future. Elle's refusal of Warner is exactly this. She doesn't erase the past, she simply stops allowing it to define her, and that moment sets her free. Nietzsche approached the same idea from a different angle with the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. Not just accepting what happened, but embracing the fact that it happened, because every painful event eventually becomes part of the path that led you somewhere meaningful. Without Warner's rejection, there is no Harvard L. Without that humiliating dinner scene, there is no courtroom victory. Without heartbreak, the person she becomes might never have existed. This doesn't mean the pain was good, but it does mean the pain created something valuable, and recognizing that transforms suffering into part of your story rather than a permanent wound. Buddhist philosophy adds one final insight. It distinguishes between love and attachment. Love allows connection. Attachment demands possession. Elle genuinely loved Warner. That love wasn't fake. But her healing required releasing the attachment to the future she imagined with him. Her final interaction with him isn't cruel. It isn't bitter. It isn't cold. It's simply calm. And that calm represents something profound. Not indifference, but wholeness. When Warner offers himself back and Elle declines, she isn't punishing him. She isn't proving a point. She's simply demonstrating that her life no longer revolves around the person who once defined her worth. Forgiveness, in this sense, isn't about absolving someone else. It's about liberating yourself. It means no longer waiting for the apology, no longer replaying the argument, no longer needing the other person to understand what they did. It looks like Elle standing in that courtroom, confident, capable, completely herself, and most importantly, completely free. By the end of the story, something remarkable has happened. The woman who once cried in a pink tracksuit on the floor of her bedroom is now standing at the podium of Harvard Law School's commencement ceremony, confident, accomplished, and completely herself. Elle Woods graduates with honors. She delivers the commencement speech. She walks forward into a life she built deliberately, alongside friends like Paulette, alongside someone who actually sees her worth, Emmett. And something else stands out. Warner is never mentioned. Not in bitterness, not in gratitude, not even in passing. He simply no longer matters. And that silence reveals the final truth about heartbreak. The storm was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of the person she became afterward. When people talk about healing from heartbreak, they often imagine a single destination, a moment where the pain disappears, a day when the memory stops hurting, a magical emotional reset button. But psychologically speaking, that's not what healing actually looks like. Therapists often describe recovery not as resolution, but as integration. The goal is not to erase grief. The goal is to change your relationship to it. Unprocessed grief tends to remain buried in the background of your life, quietly shaping decisions, quietly influencing relationships, quietly whispering things like, don't trust too much, don't open up again, don't risk being hurt like that. But integrated grief behaves differently. Instead of controlling you from the shadows, it becomes wisdom. A painful experience that eventually equips you with better judgment, stronger boundaries, and deeper self-understanding. Elle doesn't graduate despite Warner's rejection. She graduates because of what she chose to do with it. One of the most fascinating discoveries in modern psychology involves something called earned secure attachment. Researchers studying relationships noticed an interesting pattern. Some people who experienced painful or unstable relationships earlier in life eventually developed extremely healthy, stable partnerships later on, but not because they avoided emotional pain, because they processed it consciously. This phenomenon is known as earned security. It describes individuals who deliberately work through relational wounds and emerge with a deeper understanding of themselves, their needs, and their boundaries. Elle's relationship with Emmett quietly represents this transformation. Unlike Warner, Emmett never reduces her to a stereotype. He respects her intelligence. He supports her ambition. He sees the person she has become rather than the person she was expected to perform. That relationship works not because Elle forgot the past, but because she learned from it. Another powerful framework comes from Viktor Frankl's work in logotherapy. Frankl observed that human beings can endure extraordinary suffering if they can find meaning within it. Not justification, not denial, but meaning. He famously wrote that if a person has a why to live for, they can endure almost any how. Elle's why evolves dramatically across the story. At first, her motivation is simple. She wants Warner back. It's not exactly the noblest reason to apply to Harvard Law School, but it gets her moving. And as the story unfolds, that motivation transforms. Her reason for being there becomes something entirely different. Not revenge, not validation, but excellence and competence. A life she chooses for herself. The shift in why changes everything, because once your reason for moving forward belongs to you, no one else gets to take it away. There's also something happening beneath the surface biologically. Psychiatrist Dan Siegel describes the window of tolerance, the range of emotional intensity a person can experience while still remaining grounded and functional. Trauma tends to narrow this window. People become easily overwhelmed or emotionally numb. But when painful experiences are processed well, the opposite can happen. The window expands. The nervous system becomes more capable of holding both joy and pain simultaneously. In other words, the storm doesn't shrink your emotional capacity, it builds it. Elle's heartbreak didn't make her less capable of loving. It made her more capable, because she now understands both vulnerability and resilience. Poets and philosophers have captured this transformation long before psychologists began measuring it. Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves." Heartbreak begins with unanswered questions. Why did this happen? What did I miss? What does this mean about me? And the frustrating truth is that most of those questions are not answered immediately. They are answered slowly through living. Elle doesn't understand the meaning of her heartbreak when she first arrives at Harvard. She lives her way into that meaning. By the time she stands at the commencement podium, the answer has quietly emerged. Not through analysis, but rather through experience. Khalil Gibran described this dynamic beautifully when he wrote about joy and sorrow. He argued that the deeper sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain later. The hollow created by grief eventually becomes the vessel that holds future happiness. That idea can sound suspiciously like motivational poster nonsense, until you see it happen in real life. The depth of Elle's heartbreak was proportional to the depth of her love, but the same emotional depth eventually becomes the foundation of her triumph. Not because suffering is inherently good, but because human beings are capable of transforming suffering into growth. And perhaps the quietest act of courage in the entire story is something that happens almost invisibly. Elle chooses to love again. After Warner, after humiliation, after everything, she still opens her heart to Emmett, which might seem like a small detail, but philosophically speaking, it's enormous, because loving again after heartbreak requires accepting a terrifying truth. Loss is always possible. There are no guarantees. And yet, choosing connection anyway is one of the bravest decisions a person can make. Existential philosophers would call that courage. There's a scene earlier in the film that suddenly takes on a deeper meaning once you understand this transformation, the bend and snap. At the time, it's played as a comedic moment. Elle teaches other women a ridiculous maneuver designed to get a man's attention. But symbolically, it becomes something else. She turns personal knowledge into shared joy. She empowers others with something she learned through experience. And that is often what integrated heartbreak eventually becomes. You stop being defined by the pain and start being equipped by it. The lessons you earned become something you can share: guidance, wisdom, and perspective. You become someone others can stand next to when they are going through their own storm. Which brings us to the final question. If your life had its own commencement ceremony one day, what would your speech say? Not about the person who broke your heart, but about the person you became afterward. What did this experience force you to learn? What did it push you to attempt? What version of yourself is quietly emerging because of it? Because the truth is, heartbreak does not write the final chapter of your story. You do, and the next chapter is entirely yours to write. What is one thing this heartbreak pushed you to do that you never would have done otherwise? If you're navigating your own storm and looking for guidance, resources that can help you rebuild and recover are linked in the description. And like Elle walking away from that Harvard podium, the goal is not to forget the past. It's simply to reach the point where what lies ahead is finally more interesting.